Welcome to episode 11 of the Physician's Non-Clinical Guide. I have a special guest tonight, and I apologize, this started out as a video episode, but due to some technical difficulties, we lost the video, and so spliced out the audio and pushed it together, and I think you'll enjoy what my guest has to share with you. He was a full-time emergency physician, residency trained, board certified, and had some career-changing events and made a transformation, and now pursues his passion full-time. So let's get into it. So thanks for joining me for another episode of Physician's Non-Clinical Guide, and I have a special guest on tonight. It's a physician I met a few years ago by the name of Setu Mazumdar, and about 2 to 3 years ago I went to sort of a life-changing conference, and so I met Setu there, and I wanted to extend a warm welcome and thanks for coming on tonight.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Mitchell. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, and so the gist of my blog, as we talked about before, is to help physicians who are dissatisfied with clinical medicine try to find an avenue to pursue things that are non-clinical. We're both similarly trained as emergency physicians and sort of grew dissatisfied with emergency medicine in general. And so how long did you practice full-time emergency medicine before you began to sort of see the proverbial writing on the wall?
Basically, I practiced full-time for about 4.5 years, maybe 5. And I went sort of half-time or part-time after the first 4 or 5 years. So I graduated from residency in 2001. And it was so mid-2001 is when I graduated from residency, in July of 2001. Got my first job back in Atlanta. And then around January of 2006, is when I basically stopped working full-time. I was doing about half-time at that point. So about 4.5 years is when I was working full-time.
Was there something that kind of propelled you in that direction, or is it something that you kind of sort of began to see the light, so to speak?
Well, I think I started seeing the light, I guess, pretty much right when I got out of residency, and usually pretty much within a few months to a year of being out, and realizing that I was doing all these shifts and there really wasn't any end to it. There really wasn't any upward movement for sure. It was just more of seeing patients and going home and doing the same thing over and over again. But I think what really happened was that when I got out of residency, I sort of had a plan, in a sense, right from the beginning, in the sense that my goal was to save as much as I can. I didn't really know what I was going to do as far as anything non-clinical. I never really had thought about that when I first got out of residency training. It was just more of the idea that if I save as much as I can, as early as I can, then it gives me the chance to not necessarily work full-time, and for me to gain a sense of financial independence early on. Because I saw a lot of physicians that I knew that were in their 50s and 60s still working full-time, and many of them were just miserable. And I just didn't want myself to be in that position. So that was really the first thought, of just doing that. But then as I did that, and my personal financial situation grew more complex, and then had kids and started thinking about all these other financial planning issues for my personal life, that's what really drove the passion for me to consider something else as a career.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I shortly into my 3rd year of emergency medicine residency, can't really pick any defining event, but I just began to realize that this is not something that I wanted to do for the rest of my professional life, and also saw a lot of bitter physicians in their 50s and 60s that were, really hating life and hating medicine, and so I didn't have any clue what direction to pursue, and I looked at a lot of different things, but nothing really jumped out, and so I just sort of did what I guess my grandparents would say, is just to put your head down and or put your nose to the grindstone and go. And so I did that, similar to you, for about 4 or 5 years full time, and then began to really devote some energy to finding other things. And I think one of the challenges is for people to you might have interests or passions, but how did you go about finding something outside of clinical medicine? How did you get to where you are now?
Yeah, it wasn't so much that I was specifically seeking something outside of medicine as much as it was the other way around, where I developed a passion for something else and it just naturally grew into that. So the short story is that going back to getting out of residency, um, as I saved a lot, my passion just for investment management and financial planning grew to the point where I just loved it. And that was really the primary motivation for me to seriously consider saying, well, gosh, why don't I make a career out of this? How would I make that happen? Going from a full-time emergency medicine physician to being a full-time financial planner. So it's really the passion because of my personal situation that really made me think about doing that full-time and making a career switch. But the second motivation was that I was seeing all my colleagues, whether they were emergency medicine physicians or in other specialties, where if they were trying to manage their finances themselves, they either didn't know what they were doing, and I didn't know what I was doing in the beginning, or if they had other advisors, I felt like they were getting poor advice from the way that the financial services industry is set up. So I thought, okay, I've got this passion for something I naturally love doing, and I think I can see a niche market here for creating a business to serve um, physicians as a financial planner. So how do I now bridge that gap and use my training um, to pursue that? And so I basically planned out how I'm going to make that happen, and it took several years to get to the point where I am now.
So as you began to prepare and take the initial steps to pursue your new passion, did you have a master plan or a timeline when you were finally able to sort of pull the switch between working part-time clinically and pursuing your financial planning passion?
Yes, I did have a timeline. I actually sort of wrote this out, and I sort of approached this the same way we approach practicing medicine or becoming board certified. So my thought was, I'm going to approach this the same way as becoming an emergency medicine physician, in the sense that, okay, I'm going to have this educational component, and then take all the certification exams. Then I'm going to work for another group for a little bit, and then go out on my own to serve the niche that I wanted to serve. And it basically started out that way. At least, it was all written down that way, and said, okay, I'm going to take a couple of years to do this, and then go on to the next step, and so on. And initially, it started out that way, where I would, take all the CFP or Certified Financial Planner courses and all that over, a couple of years, and then at the same time work, half time. But oddly enough, what happened was that, and this is a specific day. This was back in around 2008, where I was doing this ER shift. Went home after the shift, and the next day I get this call from, I guess, the medical director at the emergency department I was working at. And he said, oh, well, did you hear what happened last night after you left the shift? And the shift really wasn't that busy towards the end. And I said, no, what happened? He said, well, about a half hour or so after you left, all these ambulances came in, and all these, there were about 20 people that signed in at the same time, and the night shift guy, had to see all of them. And I said, well, my shift was actually basically over. So what exactly is it that, I'm being blamed for? So he sends this email out, and it says, well, the hospital had to go on diversion for the first time in, I don't know, a decade or something like that. And he puts the blame on me.
Nice.
And so I looked at this and I said, and I show up the next day to the same hospital, same shift. And actually, I got this email, phone call from him during my shift, of course. So I put everything down and I said, okay. First thing I did is I called up my wife during that shift, and I said, hey, remember that plan that I had that was going to be spread out over a year or two? I said, what I want you to know is, are you okay with me if I quit tonight? And she said, absolutely, go for it. You're miserable, get out. So right then and there, I typed up my resignation letter and said, you know what, if you're going to blame me for something that's beyond my control, I'm out of here. You guys can do the night shifts, weekends, holidays, be miserable. Now, the reality is that I had the chance to do that. I could do it that way because I had saved up enough that it really didn't matter at that